The life of a pirate has been romanticized into drifting ships, fluttering flags, and treasure maps marked with an X, but the reality of living as a pirate in the 17th and 18th centuries was a slow, grinding misery that few people today would have the endurance or desperation to survive. Imagine waking up not in a warm cabin but on damp planks that never quite dry, feeling the ship sway underneath you as another wave slaps against the hull, and knowing that everything around you smells like old rope, wet wood, sweat, decay, and the faint sweetness of rot from barrels that have spoiled again. Pirates lived in this smell constantly, and soon their skin absorbed it the same way their clothes did, to the point that land dwellers could sometimes identify a pirate ship long before they saw its sails simply because the wind carried the odor. Food was a daily disappointment rather than a comforting ritual, because pirates ate what they could steal or store, and most of it went bad within weeks. The salted meat that looked somewhat edible when loaded onto the ship quickly turned into gray slabs crawling with maggots, but since everyone else ate them, no one hesitated much. Hardtack, the biscuit that was supposed to last months, was often so infested with weevils that pirates simply gave up the idea of removing them and ate everything together for the extra protein. Water was never clear, because stored water grew algae, mold, and slime. Pirates drank it anyway, often mixing it with cheap alcohol to mask the taste, even though it did nothing to fix the stomach cramps that followed. Hygiene was a concept pirates dreamed about but rarely experienced. You could go weeks without washing because fresh water was for drinking, not cleaning, and even when rain came, storms made the deck too dangerous to stand on without risking being washed overboard. Clothes soaked in sweat and brine dried stiff and scratchy, and skin peeled under the salt that crusted on every surface. Lice lived in every shirt seam, and fleas nested in blankets, while rats scurried across sleeping men at night. These rats were both a curse and a strange blessing. Pirates hated them for eating through food stores and chewing on the wood, but they also welcomed them in desperate times because a rat roasted over a fire was sometimes the only fresh meat they saw for months. Most pirates also developed chronic infections that never healed properly: cuts from rigging, splinters from the deck, burns from gunpowder, and sores from shackles when prisoners were taken. Without medicine, wounds festered, and the constant humidity kept them open and raw. Sleep was never peaceful. Pirates slept in shifts because someone always needed to watch the sea, the sails, or the horizon for enemy ships or naval patrols. When you did get your turn, you lay on the hard deck or on a shared hammock that swung in rhythm with the ship, often bumping into the man next to you. People snored, mumbled, twitched, shook from fever dreams, or woke coughing because of the mold that grew everywhere. Rats rustled nearby. The ship creaked constantly. Every sudden movement of the hull reminded you that storms could rise without warning and kill half the crew without giving them time to pray. Storms were the truest test of a pirate's sanity. A sudden gale could snap masts, sweep cannons across the deck like loose boulders, or tear the sails to ribbons. Pirates climbed the rigging anyway, fingers numb and bleeding as they fought wind strong enough to lift a man from the ropes. Lightning struck the ocean and lit up terrified faces. Water flooded the deck, forcing pirates to bail with buckets for hours to keep the ship from sinking. After a storm passed, the air went strangely quiet, and the exhausted crew would look around to count who was still alive. Some men simply vanished into the sea, dragged under by waves. Their absence was noted quietly, sometimes not at all. Discipline on pirate ships was not as chaotic as movies suggest. In fact, pirates enforced rules more strictly than many naval crews because chaos meant death. Every ship had its own articles, agreed-upon laws that outlined how treasure would be divided, how disputes would be settled, and what punishments awaited those who stole, fought without permission, or abandoned their posts. Punishments could be brutal. A thief might lose an ear. A man who fell asleep on watch could be whipped until his back tore open. In extreme cases, a crew might maroon someone on an empty island with a flask of water and a pistol, leaving him to die slowly or shoot himself before starvation took hold. Pirates accepted these rules because order kept them alive, but living under constant threat made anxiety a permanent companion. Combat was not romantic swordplay but a chaotic, deafening nightmare. Before boarding a ship, pirates loaded pistols, sharpened blades, lit slow-burning matches for cannons, and stuffed pockets with extra shot. The air filled with smoke so thick it blinded everyone, and the smell of burnt powder clung to skin for days. Cannonballs shredded wood, sending deadly splinters flying. Pistols were inaccurate and often misfired, so men fired once and then threw them aside to fight with knives and cutlasses, where every movement might skim bone or open an artery. The screaming, the blood, the panic, it all blended into a haze. After battles, the deck was slippery with gore and needed to be washed with buckets of seawater while exhausted pirates dragged bodies, both friend and enemy, across the planks for burial or dumping into the sea. Disease was a constant threat, more deadly than naval fire. Scurvy plagued almost every pirate crew because fresh fruit was rare. Gums swelled and bled, teeth loosened and fell out. Skin bruised from the slightest touch, and joints ached so badly that even standing became torture. Dysentery spread quickly in the tight living spaces, turning the lower deck into a miserable place of stench and suffering. Malaria haunted anyone who sailed near tropical waters. Fevers shook men until they collapsed, and sometimes the only solution was to throw the delirious patient into the sea to prevent further spread, though crews rarely spoke of such grim decisions afterward. Despite all this, pirates lived by a strange code of equality unusual for the time. Captains were elected, not born into power, and could be removed by popular vote. Shares of loot were divided more fairly than in most navies, where common sailors earned almost nothing. Even so, loot was unpredictable. A successful raid could leave everyone drinking and celebrating with newfound riches, but months might pass without finding a ship worth attacking, leaving the crew hungry, bitter, and restless. Many pirates gambled away their shares immediately, turning celebrations into brawls. Drink flowed easily, but it was cheap and harsh, leaving throats raw and minds dulled. Life in port was not the freedom many imagined. Ports that accepted pirates were usually lawless, muddy places full of disease and exploitation. Pirates wasted their earnings in days, buying poor quality alcohol, companionship, or clothing that would soon rot on the ship. These places were crawling with informants ready to betray pirates to authorities, and naval patrols often ambushed them as soon as they docked. Even trusted merchants cheated them with fake goods or watered-down rum. The fleeting excitement of land only emphasized the bleakness of returning to sea with empty pockets. Most pirates did not live long. The average pirate's career lasted less than 2 years before disease, execution, drowning, or violent combat ended it. Many were captured by naval forces, dragged back to port, and put on trial in public spectacles meant to discourage others. Chains bit into their ankles as they stood before judges who rarely listened to their pleas. Hangings were common, and bodies sometimes remained displayed as warnings, swinging on gallows for months. Yet despite the horrors, some men chose piracy because it offered a kind of desperate freedom. Life on land for many was not much better, full of poverty, backbreaking labor, and strict social hierarchies. At sea, a pirate had a voice in decisions, a share in rewards, and a chance, however slim, to change his fate. This mixture of misery and autonomy created a strange world where danger, suffering, and fleeting camaraderie blended into a life that few today would want but many at the time found strangely compelling. When you imagine yourself on a pirate ship, rocking under an endless sky, listening to the creak of old wood and the mutter of tired men, remember that the reality was far harsher than any legend. Every day was a negotiation with hunger, illness, storms, and violence, and every night brought only the uneasy rest of someone who knew death might come quietly with the next wave. For all the romantic tales of gold and glory, the truth remains that the life of a pirate was not one of adventure but a slow march through hardship, discomfort, and constant fear, a life that very few would survive even a single month in, let alone years. The ocean held both their freedom and their graves, and in the end, most pirates vanished into its depths, forgotten except in the stories that made their suffering seem far grander than it ever felt to them in those long, sleepless nights at sea.